Because his mistress poisoned herself and blamed her, her billionaire husband sent her to prison for 5 years. She was 3 months pregnant. He visited once, to take their newborn son away. The day she walked free was the day he lost everything. Before we dive into the details, take a quick moment to subscribe, hit like, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I'd truly love to know this story is reaching Canada, the United States of America, Australia, Africa, and even the United Kingdom. Let me know where you're listening from. Now, let's begin. Lenora Gray heard the word guilty and felt her unborn child kick for the very first time, a tiny heartbeat against a heart that Michael Gray had just shattered into a million pieces. The courtroom swam before her eyes, the chandeliers of the historic Manhattan courthouse blurring into streaks of gold against dark wood. Judge Harrison's voice continued, mechanical and distant, something about sentencing guidelines and the severity of corporate espionage combined with attempted manslaughter. 5 years. The words landed like stones in water, disappearing into a depth Lenora couldn't measure. 1,825 days. She tried to count them, watching her hand instinctively move to protect the small curve of her belly, 3 months along, barely showing beneath the Chanel suit. The cream-colored one Michael had commissioned for her last birthday, telling the tailor, "Make my wife look like the queen she is." She'd worn it today because some foolish part of her believed it mattered what she looked like when they declared her innocent. She'd even styled her natural hair in the elegant low bun Michael once said made her look regal and untouchable, wanting to appear strong and composed for the cameras she'd assumed would capture her vindication. What a fool. Behind her, someone gasped, her best friend Nia, probably, or maybe her cousin Marcus. The sound cut through the courtroom murmured like breaking glass. But Lenora couldn't turn around. Couldn't move. She could only stand there, one hand pressed against her stomach where their son was growing, the other gripping the defense table until her knuckles lost all color. Until she couldn't feel her fingers anymore. Couldn't feel anything except the weight of Michael's testimony still hanging in the air like smoke after a fire, choking her, poisoning everything. "Your Honor, I have to be honest. Lenora became someone I didn't recognize after she found out about Elena and me. She was obsessed, jealous, constantly accusing Elena of things that weren't true. She would show up at my office unannounced, go through my phone, make scenes at board meetings. I was afraid of what she might do. When Elena got sick, when the doctors found the poison in her system, I didn't want to believe it. But the evidence. Every word is a lie. Every syllable was a betrayal so complete it defied comprehension. She'd sat there listening to him destroy her with fiction, her hands trembling as he described a woman she'd never been. She'd never shown up unannounced, she'd designed that office, had her own keycard, her own desk in the executive suite where she'd spent countless nights perfecting the blueprints that built his empire. She'd never gone through his phone, he'd given her the password on their wedding night, saying, "No secrets between us, ever." She'd never made a scene, she'd found out about Elena and confronted him privately, in their home, and when he'd begged for another chance, she'd agreed. For the baby she was already carrying. For the life they'd built together. Obsessed. Jealous. Dangerous. The accusations were so absurd they would have been laughable if they weren't destroying her life. If they weren't sending her to prison while pregnant with his child. Liar, she thought with each word. Liar. The guard touched her elbow now, surprisingly gentle for someone about to take her freedom. "Ma'am, we need to stand." Lenora turned, her body moving without permission from her brain, and looked across the courtroom to where Michael sat in the front row of the gallery. Elena Vance sat beside him, her hand resting possessively on his arm, a white bandage still visible on her wrist from where she'd supposedly been poisoned by the green smoothie Lenora had made that morning, the same smoothie recipe Elena had specifically requested after her yoga class, asking Lenora to add extra spinach and that detox powder you use. Michael was crying. Tears streaming down his perfectly sculpted face, his shoulders shaking beneath his Tom Ford suit, his hands covering his mouth like he was trying to hold back screams. His eyes met hers for one terrible moment, and in them, she saw guilt. No remorse for lying. Not horror at what he was doing to his pregnant wife. Guilt that he'd been caught with Elena. Guilt that the affair had become public. Guilt that his carefully constructed image as Manhattan's most eligible billionaire turned devoted husband was crumbling. Guilt so heavy he'd sacrificed her, sacrificed them, her and their unborn child, to lighten it. To save face. To keep his mistress happy and his board of directors convinced that he, not Lenora, was the true genius behind gray architectural innovations. Good, she thought, and the coldness of that single word terrified her more than the verdict. She wanted to feel rage, wanted to feel betrayal sharp enough to cut through the numbness. But there was only this vast emptiness, this sense of unreality, like she was watching someone else's life collapse in real time while her baby kicked gently against her palm, oblivious to the fact that his father had just chosen his mistress's lies over his own son's future. The walk to the side exit seemed endless. Each step echoed in the suddenly silent courtroom. The handcuffs clicked around her wrists, cold metal against skin that had worn a 15-carat diamond just 6 months ago. Behind her, she could hear Nia crying, screaming something at Michael, her voice high and desperate. Security was moving between them. The judge was calling for an order. And Elena sat perfectly still, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue like she was the victim here, like she hadn't just sent an innocent pregnant woman to prison with lies. 6 months ago, Lenora had been Manhattan's rising star architect, her name whispered in the same breath as Zaha Hadid and Jean Gang. She'd had a penthouse with a view of Central Park, a husband who kissed her awake every morning, a career that was entirely her own, until Michael started taking credit for her designs, and she let him because she loved him, because she thought supporting his ego was what wives did, because she didn't realize he was building an empire on the blueprints she drew at 3 a.m. while he slept. 6 months ago, her biggest worry was whether to tell Michael about the pregnancy before or after his big investor meeting. Whether to use the tiny Tiffany box or just surprise him at dinner. She'd been planning their future, nursery colors, baby names, how to balance motherhood and her career. She'd bookmarked articles about black women in architecture and saved quotes about raising children to be proud of their heritage. She thought Michael would be excited. She thought. What a fool she'd been. Then Elena had collapsed at the office. Dramatic, sudden, gasping for air in the middle of a board meeting. Paramedics. Sirens. Tests showing high levels of nightshade alkaloids in her bloodstream. Security footage of Lenora handing Elena the green smoothie that morning. Elena's tearful testimony, she said it would help with my digestion. I trusted her. I thought we were friends. Friends. The woman who'd been sleeping with her husband for 8 months. The woman who'd been systematically stealing Lenora's design files and presenting them as her own ideas. The woman who now sat in Lenora's seat at Michael's side, wearing Lenora's influence like a stolen coat. Lenora had tried to explain, the smoothie was Elena's recipe, Elena's request, the same ingredients Lenora used every day. She had receipts, texts, and witnesses. But Michael's legal team was better. His lawyers were sharks. And his testimony was the knife that cut her defense to ribbons. Elena will be a better mother than a criminal ever could, he'd said yesterday when his lawyers served her with divorce papers. In jail. While she waited for trial. While their son grew inside her, unaware that his father had already erased him from the story. As the guards led her through the corridor toward the transport van, she heard Michael's voice echoing from somewhere behind them, breaking through the chaos. "Lenora, please. I'm sorry. I had to tell the truth as I saw it. I'm so sorry." She didn't turn around. Didn't acknowledge him. Just kept walking, the chains between her ankles rattling with each step, one hand protectively cradling her stomach where their son, her son now, continued his gentle flutter kicks. In the van, alone in the metal cage, Lenora closed her eyes and tried to remember what it felt like to believe in love. Tried to remember the Michael who'd proposed on a rooftop overlooking the skyline she'd helped him build, who'd held her through her mother's death, who'd slow danced with her in their unfinished penthouse at midnight, promising, "Everything I build is yours, everything I am is yours." That man was gone. Maybe he'd never existed. Maybe she'd loved a ghost for 7 years and was only now seeing the truth, that Michael Gray was a man so desperate to be seen as a genius, he'd destroy the woman whose brilliance actually built his empire. A man so weak, he'd send his pregnant wife to prison to keep his mistress happy. A man so selfish, he'd take their newborn son before she even got to hold him, just to prove he still had power over her. She didn't know which possibility was worse. The van started moving. Through the small window, Lenora caught a glimpse of the courthouse steps. Michael stood there, collapsed against the marble railing, his face buried in his hands, Elena's arms around him, comforting him like he was the victim. Lenora watched until the building disappeared from view. Then she turned to face forward, toward whatever was coming next, and made herself a promise in the darkness. She would survive this. She would survive him. She would give birth to their son, and somehow, someway, she would get him back. And Michael Gray would understand, truly understand, the magnitude of what he'd destroyed. Not just a marriage. Not just a woman's freedom. But the very foundation his empire was built on. The woman who'd loved Michael Gray died in that courtroom. What walked into the prison was a mother. And mothers, Lenora was about to learn, could survive anything. Could endure anything. Could become anything necessary to protect their children. Even if it meant becoming someone Michael Gray would no longer recognize. Even if it meant becoming someone she no longer recognized. Because soft women don't survive in cages. And Lenora Gray was done being soft. The cage and the crib. The intake officer didn't care that Lenora was pregnant. Didn't care that the strip search made her vomit into the metal toilet in the corner, morning sickness and humiliation mixing until she couldn't tell which was which. Didn't care that her hands shook so badly she couldn't hold the prison-issue clothing steady enough to dress herself. The orange jumpsuit hung loose on her frame, swallowing the small bump that was the only evidence of the life growing inside her, the only thing Michael hadn't managed to take yet. Bedford Hills Correctional Facility smelled like industrial cleaner and desperation. The walls were the color of old bruises, gray-green paint peeling in the corners where decades of women had pressed their hands, their foreheads, their breaking hearts against concrete that never gave. Lenora's cell was 6 by 8 feet. A metal bunk bolted to the wall. A toilet with no seat. A sink that dripped constantly, each drop marking time she couldn't afford to lose. 70 square feet for her and the baby she'd have to birth here, in this place that swallowed sound and hope in equal measure. Her cellmate was a woman named Gloria who didn't speak for the first 3 days. Just watched Lenora with dark, knowing eyes while Lenora cried silently into the thin mattress, one hand always on her stomach, feeling her son kick against her palm like he was trying to tell her something. Trying to say he was still here, still fighting, still hers. She wrote the first letter to Michael on day 4, hands cramping around the stubby pencil they'd allowed her. The words came in fragments, desperate and raw. She told him about the baby's kicks, about how their son was strong, how she could feel him growing despite everything. She told him the truth about Elena, about the setup, about the deleted security footage from her laptop that would prove the smoothie recipe came from Elena's own nutritionist. She begged him to look at their life, their 7 years, their vows, and see the woman he'd married instead of the monster his lawyers had painted. The letter came back 2 weeks later. Unopened. Return to sender stamped across her careful handwriting in red ink that looked like blood. She wrote again anyway. And again. Each letter returned with the same brutal efficiency. Michael Gray didn't want her truth. He'd already decided which story to believe, which woman deserved his protection. And it wasn't the one carrying his child in a cage. By week 6, Lenora stopped writing letters to her husband. She started writing letters to her son instead. Letters he'd read someday, when he was old enough to understand what his father had done. Letters that documented every kick, every flutter, every moment she survived in this place. Letters that would prove she'd never stopped fighting for him. Gloria finally spoke on day 43, watching Lenora write. "That man ain't coming for you, honey. Better you learn that now." Lenora looked up from the page, one hand pressed against her growing belly. "I know," she said quietly. "But I'm coming for him." Birth in shackles. The contraction started at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday in March, 6 months into her sentence. Lenora woke up gasping, her water breaking on the thin mattress, soaking through the sheets in a warm rush that terrified her more than anything since the guilty verdict. Gloria was screaming for the guards before Lenora could form words, pounding on the cell bars with both fists while Lenora doubled over, gripping her swollen belly and trying to remember how to breathe. They shackled her ankles for transport to the prison medical ward. "Protocol," they said. Like a woman in active labor was going to run. Like she had anywhere to go. The chains rattled with each contraction, metal biting into skin that was already swollen, already tender. She vomited twice in the van, everything she'd managed to eat that day coming up in burning waves while a guard sat beside her, bored, checking his phone like this was just another Tuesday night shift. The medical ward was fluorescent bright and freezing cold. They handcuffed her right wrist to the bed rail before the OB/GYN even examined her. A different doctor than she'd seen during her sparse prenatal visits, this one younger, uncomfortable, avoiding her eyes like looking at her might be contagious. 7 centimeters dilated, he announced to the guard, not to her. Like she wasn't even there. Like her body was just a vessel they were waiting to empty. Labor lasted 14 hours. 14 hours of contractions that felt like her body was tearing itself apart, of screaming until her voice went hoarse, of begging for an epidural they said wasn't available, wasn't in the budget for inmates. 14 hours handcuffed to a bed with a guard watching from the corner, scrolling through social media while she suffered through the most primal pain she'd ever known. Her son was born at 4:47 p.m., 6 pounds 3 ounces, screaming his arrival into a world that had already decided he didn't belong to her. They let her hold him for exactly 12 minutes. 12 minutes to memorize the shape of his face, the way his tiny fingers wrapped around hers, the impossible softness of his skin still warm from her body. 12 minutes to whisper promises into his downy black hair, to tell him she loved him, that she'd find him, that this wasn't forever. Then Michael walked in. He looked older, thinner, his Tom Ford suit hanging wrong on his frame like he'd lost weight from stress or guilt or whatever rich men lose when their lives start catching up to them. But he didn't look at her. Didn't acknowledge the woman who just birthed his child in chains. just walked straight to the bassinet where the nurse was wrapping their son in a standard-issue hospital blanket, white with pink and blue stripes, nothing like the organic cotton receiving blankets Lenora had picked out months ago, before everything shattered. "Is this him?" Michael's voice was flat, businessman efficient, like he was confirming a package delivery. "Yes, Mr. Gray." The social worker materialized beside him, clipboard ready, papers already prepared. "If you'll just sign here for temporary custody, and here for the birth certificate amendment." "Michael, please." Lenora tried to sit up, tried to reach for her baby, but the handcuff yanked her back down, metal cutting into her wrist. "Please don't do this. He's our son. He needs his mother. He needs a mother who isn't in prison." Michael's eyes finally met hers, and they were empty, belonging to a stranger wearing her husband's face. "You did this to yourself, Lenora. You made your choices. I didn't poison her. Michael, you know me, you know I would never. I know what the evidence showed. I know what the jury decided." He turned back to the social worker, pen already in hand. "Where do I sign?" "Michael." Her voice cracked, desperation making it shrill. "That's your son. Our son. You can't just take him. I'm his father. I have full legal custody. You signed away your rights when you committed a crime." Each word was a scalpel, precise and cutting. He signed the papers with quick, practiced strokes, the same signature that used to sign birthday cards and anniversary notes and love letters she'd saved in a box that was probably in a storage unit somewhere now, everything she'd owned scattered and lost. "What are you naming him?" The social worker's pen hovered over the birth certificate. "Christopher James Gray." Michael lifted their son from the bassinet, holding him stiffly, awkwardly, like he'd never held a baby before despite all the classes they'd taken together, all the YouTube videos they'd watched at midnight, laughing about diaper disasters and sleep deprivation they'd never get to experience. "CJ for short. After my father." "No." The word came out broken, barely a whisper. "We were going to name him Caleb. Caleb James. We chose it together, remember? At that restaurant in Tribeca, you said. That was before." Michael adjusted his grip on CJ, who'd started to fuss, tiny face scrunching up in preparation for a cry. "Before everything changed. Before you showed me who you really are. I'm the same person I've always been. The woman you married, the woman who built your company with you, the woman you said you'd love forever. Elena will be a better mother than a criminal ever could." Michael's voice dropped, quiet and final, the tone he used in board meetings when a decision was made and discussion was over. "She's waiting in the car. She's already decorated the nursery. She'll give him the life he deserves. The life you can't." "Michael, please," Lenora was sobbing now, pulling against the handcuff hard enough to draw blood, reaching for her baby with her free hand, fingers grasping at air. "Please don't take him. I just need to hold him one more time. Please. I'm begging you." But he was already walking toward the door, CJ in his arms, the social worker following with her clipboard and her practiced sympathy and her complete indifference to the sound of a mother's heart breaking in real time. "Michael." Lenora screamed his name, screamed until her throat was raw, until the guard moved toward her with a sedative, until her voice gave out entirely and there was nothing left but the sound of a door closing and footsteps fading in a silence so complete it felt like death. They gave her something for the pain eventually. Something that made the room blur and her body go numb and her mind slip sideways into gray nothing. But there was no medication for this. No drug strong enough to stop her breasts from producing milk for a baby who wasn't there, no anesthesia for the phantom weight of him in her arms, no pill that could make her forget those 12 minutes when he'd been hers. When they brought her back to the cell hours later, Gloria was waiting. She didn't ask questions, didn't offer platitudes, just held Lenora while she shattered completely, while breast milk soaked through her prison jumpsuit and dripped onto the concrete floor, while her body screamed for a child it would never feed, never rock, never watch grow. "You're going to survive this," Gloria whispered fiercely. "You hear me, girl? You're going to survive this hell, and you're going to get your baby back." Lenora closed her eyes, tears still streaming down her face, and made that promise her prayer. Her mission. Her only reason to keep her heart beating. She would survive this. She would get CJ back. And Michael Gray would learn what happened when you stole from a mother. He would learn that some women, when you take everything from them, don't break. They sharpen. The accountant's secret. Mama V arrived at Bedford Hills 3 weeks after Lenora lost CJ, assigned to the same cell block after Gloria got early release for good behavior. The woman was 60-something with silver locks twisted into an elegant crown, reading glasses perched on her nose, and the kind of quiet dignity that made even the guards speak to her with something resembling respect. She looked like someone's grandmother, like she should be baking cookies and dispensing wisdom on a front porch somewhere, not serving 5 years for embezzlement. Lenora barely noticed her at first. Barely noticed anything except the ache in her breasts that was finally starting to fade and the much worse ache in her chest that never would. She spent her days in a fog of grief, going through the motions of prison life like a ghost, writing letters to a son who would never read them because Michael had probably already thrown them away. It was Mama V who broke through the haze, sliding into the seat across from Lenora in the cafeteria one morning, her tray untouched, her dark eyes sharp and knowing behind those reading glasses. "You're Lenora Gray," she said. Not a question. A statement of fact. Lenora looked up from the oatmeal she'd been pushing around her tray, too numb to eat, too exhausted to care. "Do I know you?" "No, baby. But I know you. More importantly, I know your husband." Mama V leaned forward, voice dropping low. "I was Michael Gray's senior accountant for 12 years. Vivian Marshall. They call me Mama V in here." Something flickered in Lenora's chest. Not quite hope, but close. "You worked for Michael?" "Worked for him. Kept his books. Managed his accounts. Made sure the money flowed where it needed to flow and nobody asked too many questions." Mama V's smile was bitter. "Until I started asking questions myself. Until I found the offshore accounts he and that woman were setting up. Until I told him I couldn't be part of whatever fraud they were planning." Lenora's hand stilled on her tray. Elena. Elena Vance. Chief Operating Officer with her hands in every financial cookie jar Michael had. Mama V pulled a worn photograph from her pocket, sliding it across the table. It showed her standing with Michael at some company event, both of them smiling, back when Mama V had been free and Michael had been pretending to be honest. "I found transfers, baby. Millions moving through shell corporations, accounts in the Caymans, money that didn't match any legitimate business expense. I brought it to Michael, told him I needed to report it, that I couldn't sign off on the next audit without answers. What did he do? He had me arrested 3 days later. Claimed I'd been embezzling. Used doctored files that made it look like I was the one stealing, not him and his mistress." Mama V's voice was steady, but her eyes blazed with a fury that Lenora recognized, that mirrored her own. "Send me here to keep me quiet. To make sure nobody would believe a convicted felon if I ever tried to tell the truth." Lenora felt something wake up inside her, something that had been sleeping since they'd taken CJ from her arms. Something sharp and focused and hungry for justice. "Do you have proof?" "I have a memory. I have 12 years of knowing how Michael operates, how he thinks, where he hides his secrets." Mama V leaned back, studying Lenora with those sharp eyes. "I heard about your case. Poisoning, corporate espionage, attempted murder. I knew it was garbage the second I saw the news. Michael doesn't just betray people, baby. He destroys them. Make sure they can't ever come back to haunt him. He took my son." The words came out broken. "He took CJ and gave him to Elena to raise. My baby doesn't even know I exist. Then we make sure you get out of here. Make sure you get your boy back. Make sure Michael Gray and Elena Vance pay for every lie they've told. Mama V reached across the table, covering Lenora's hand with hers, warm and solid and real. But first, you need to learn. Need to understand how his empire works, how the money moves, where the bodies are buried. You need to become the weapon that cuts him down. That's how prison school started. Every evening after dinner, in the corner of the day room where the guards rarely looked, Mama V taught Lenora everything she knew. Corporate structures and financial instruments, offshore accounts and shell corporations, the mechanics of fraud and how to recognize it, how to trace it, how to prove it. She drew diagrams on scraps of paper that Lenora memorized and then destroyed, teaching her to see the architecture of Michael's business empire the same way she once saw the architecture of buildings, blueprint by blueprint, foundation by foundation, finding the structural weaknesses that could bring the whole thing crashing down. He built this empire on your designs, Mama V said one night, 3 months into their lessons. Every building with his name on it, you drew the plans. Every innovation he's famous for, you created. He's been stealing from you since the beginning, baby. Taking credit for your genius while treating you like decoration. Lenora thought about all the late nights she'd spent perfecting blueprints while Michael slept, all the problems she'd solved that he presented as his own ideas in board meetings, all the times she'd stayed silent because she thought that's what supportive wives did. Thought making him look good was the same as being loved. I was a fool, she whispered. No, Mama V said firmly. You were in love. There's a difference. But now you're getting an education. And educated women are dangerous women, especially ones with nothing left to lose. Lenora looked down at the notes she'd been taking, the careful diagrams of Michael's financial web, the list of shell corporations and suspicious transfers, the pattern of fraud that was starting to emerge like a photograph developing in chemicals. I have everything to lose, she said quietly. I have CJ. Then we make sure you win, Mama V said. We make sure when you walk out of here, you don't just get your son back. You take everything Michael built on your stolen work and you burn it to the ground. For the first time since they'd taken her baby, Lenora smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a woman who just found her purpose. 3 years of ashes. 3 years in, and Lenora Gray no longer cried at night. No longer wrote letters to a son who would never receive them. No longer looked at photos of CJ that Mama V's connections occasionally smuggled in, a toddler now, dark curls and Michael's blue eyes, laughing in Elena's arms like she was the only mother he'd ever known. Looking at those photos didn't break her anymore. It sharpened her. Reminded her exactly why she was still breathing, still fighting, still getting up at 5 every morning to do push-ups on the cell floor until her muscles screamed. She could do 100 without stopping now. Could run the prison yard until the guards called time. Her body had become something hard and efficient, all softness carved away by routine and rage and the singular focus of a woman who'd lost everything and refused to disappear quietly. Her mind had become something sharper still. Mama V had taught her well. 3 years of prison school, 3 years of memorizing Michael's business structure, learning the intricate web of holding companies and subsidiaries, and understanding the financial architecture that held Gray architectural innovations together. Lenora knew every project Michael had in development, every investor he was courting, every structural weakness in buildings he claimed to have designed but that bore her fingerprints in every line. She knew where the money came from and where it went. Knew which accounts were legitimate and which were Elena's carefully constructed frauds. Knew exactly how many millions they'd stolen, not just from investors, but from her. The Gray Tower. The Apex Center. The Manhattan Skybridge. All her designs. All bearing Michael's signature. All built on blueprints she'd drawn at 3 in the morning while he slept, believing she was building their future together, never realizing she was just building his empire while he planned her erasure. You're ready, Mama V said one morning, 3 years and 2 days after Lenora had given birth in chains. Time to remind him what he threw away. Lenora had been waiting for this. I had been preparing. She pulled out the papers she'd been collecting, the sketches she'd been recreating from memory on stolen commissary receipts, the blueprints she'd carried in her head for 7 years before Michael ever put his name on them. The original designs for the Meridian project, Michael's current flagship development, the 50-story mixed-use tower that was supposed to cement his legacy as a visionary architect. Except Michael hadn't designed it. Lenora had. 5 years ago, before Elena, before prison, before everything shattered. She'd created it as an anniversary gift, sketching it in secret, planning to surprise him with the blueprint that would define his career. She'd never gotten the chance. Found out about the affair before their anniversary, tucked the plans away, tried to salvage their marriage instead. Michael had found the blueprints anyway. Stolen them from her home office while she was arrested. Claimed them as his own. Now she was claiming them back. She had Mama V's connections mail the package to Michael's office, timed to arrive on his birthday. No return address. No note. Just the original blueprints in her distinctive hand, every calculation in her handwriting, every innovative solution bearing her architectural signature. The proof that the Meridian project wasn't his genius. It was hers. Had always been hers. And tucked between the pages, one photograph. CJ as a newborn, 12 minutes old, in Lenora's arms in that prison medical ward. The only photo she had of them together. The only proof that she'd ever held her son. On the back, in careful script, "You built your throne on stolen dreams. I'm coming to take back what's mine. Starting with our son." 3 days later, Mama V's sources reported that Michael had locked himself in his office for 6 hours after receiving the package. That he'd emerged pale, shaking, looking like he'd seen a ghost. That he'd cancelled all his meetings and gone home early, something he never did. Good, Lenora thought, and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. Let him be afraid. Let him lie awake at night wondering when she'd strike next, wondering what else she knew, wondering if the empire he'd built on her stolen work was about to crumble. She had 2 more years on her sentence. 2 more years to plan, to prepare, to transform herself into the weapon that would dismantle everything Michael had taken from her. 2 more years until she walked out of this cage. And then Michael Gray would learn what it meant to destroy a woman who'd spent 3 years in hell learning how to build empires and burn them down in equal measure. She wasn't the soft, trusting wife he'd sent to prison anymore. She was something much more dangerous. She was a mother with nothing left to lose and everything to take back. And she was just getting started. The mistress's mistake. Elena Vance was unraveling, and everyone in Michael's inner circle could see it except Michael himself. She'd moved into the penthouse the week after Lenora's conviction, redecorated with aggressive efficiency, erasing every trace of the woman who'd actually belonged there. White marble where Lenora had chosen warm wood. Chrome and glass where there'd been art and color. The space looked like a hotel now, expensive and soulless, just like the woman living in it. She'd taken Lenora's office too, the corner suite on the 42nd floor with views of Central Park, where Lenora used to sketch designs while the sun rose over Manhattan. Elena had replaced the drafting table with a standing desk, covered the walls with motivational quotes and her own press clippings, played classical music at volumes that made the associates wince. She worked 16-hour days, paranoid and manic, checking every email twice, questioning every decision, treating the staff like enemies instead of colleagues. "She's losing it," Marcus, Michael's business partner, said carefully during a board meeting Michael had left early. "The Simmons account, the Perth deal, the Singapore investors, she's making mistakes. Costing us money. Costing us credibility." But Michael wouldn't hear it. Couldn't hear it. Because admitting Elena was failing meant admitting he'd destroyed his wife for nothing. Meant facing what he'd done, who he'd become, what he'd sacrificed. So he defended her. Made excuses. Covered her errors with his reputation and his money and his increasingly desperate attempts to hold everything together. The Empire Project was his Hail Mary, the crown jewel that would silence the whispers about Elena's incompetence and prove that Gray Architectural Innovations didn't need Lenora Gray. 60 stories of luxury condominiums with revolutionary structural design, sustainable materials, breathtaking aesthetics. The project that would define his legacy. Except Michael hadn't designed it. He'd cobbled it together from old presentations and half-remembered conversations, trying to recreate Lenora's genius from fragments and guesswork. He'd studied her archived files, stolen elements from her previous work, convinced himself he understood the principles she tried to teach him during their marriage when he was too busy taking credit to actually learn. The first crack appeared 6 months into construction. Hairline fracture in the foundation's northwest corner, small enough that the contractor didn't report it immediately. Then another crack. Then stress fractures in the support columns on the 8th floor. Then a section of curtain wall that didn't quite align, creating pressure points that made the structural engineers nervous. Michael called emergency meetings. Brought in consultants. Threw money at the problem. But none of them could see what Lenora would have seen in seconds, that the load-bearing calculations were wrong, that the innovative cantilever design he'd claimed as his own didn't account for wind shear at that height, that the whole thing was built on mathematical errors because Michael Gray could present Lenora's genius but couldn't replicate it. The consultants recommended stopping construction. Redesigning from the ground up. Millions in losses. Months of delays. A public admission that the great Michael Gray had created something structurally unsound. Elena's response was to double down. "We continue," she announced in a conference room full of worried engineers. "We hired the best people. We trust the design. Michael's vision is sound." Except it wasn't Michael's vision. It was Lenora's vision, bastardized and broken, stripped of the mathematical elegance that made it work. And Elena, who'd spent 3 years pretending to be the woman Lenora was, had no idea how to fix it. She started drinking. Just wine at first, at business dinners and client meetings. Then wine at lunch. Then vodka in her coffee, breath mints to hide the smell, sunglasses to hide the evidence of sleepless nights spent terrified that everything she'd schemed for was collapsing. Michael found her passed out in Lenora's old office one night at 2 in the morning, an empty bottle on the desk, blueprints scattered across the floor, red pen marks everywhere like she'd been trying to solve problems she didn't understand. He carried her home. Put her to bed. Told himself she was just stressed, just overwhelmed, just human. He didn't let himself think about how Lenora used to work those same late nights, solving those same impossible problems, making his project structurally sound while he took clients to dinner and took credit for her brilliance. Didn't let himself remember how she'd never needed the vodka. Never needed the manic energy. Just quiet competence and mathematical precision and a genius he'd taken for granted until it was locked in a cage 3 hours north. The Empire Project's construction stopped 2 weeks later. City inspectors red-tagged the site. Structural integrity compromised. Immediate evacuation. Investigation pending. The press had a field day. Gray's empire crumbles. Cracks in the foundation. Architectural giants fall from grace. Michael's phone rang constantly. Investors are demanding answers. Board members calling emergency meetings. Lawsuits being filed by condo buyers who'd put down deposits on luxury apartments in a building that might never be finished. And through it all, Elena smiled for the cameras and blamed everyone but herself, everyone but Michael, while their empire, built on Lenora's stolen designs and held together by lies, began its slow, inevitable collapse. In her cell at Bedford Hills, Lenora heard the news and smiled. Right on schedule. The smoking gun. His name was David Shen, and Elena Vance had fired him 3 months after Lenora's conviction for asking too many questions about backup protocols and data retention policies. He'd been Gray Architectural Innovations' IT director for 6 years, the kind of meticulous professional who documented everything and never quite trusted anyone, especially not executives who wanted files deleted without proper authorization. He walked into Patricia Okafor's law office on a Tuesday morning carrying a laptop and a flash drive and enough nervous energy to power Manhattan. Patricia had been taking Lenora's case pro bono for the past year, convinced of her innocence but lacking the evidence to prove it, fighting an uphill battle against a justice system that had already decided Lenora Gray was guilty and wasn't interested in reconsidering. "I have something you need to see," David said, setting the laptop on Patricia's desk with hands that shook slightly. "Something I probably should have come forward with 3 years ago, but I was scared. I had a family to feed, a mortgage to pay, and Elena Vance made it very clear what happened to people who crossed her." Patricia leaned forward, lawyer instincts prickling. "What kind of something?" "Video footage. From the executive suite security cameras. The night Elena Vance claimed Lenora poisoned her." David opened the laptop, pulled up a file with a timestamp from 3 years ago. "Elena wanted all the footage from that night deleted. Said it was a privacy issue, that she didn't want video of her being sick circulating. She had Michael authorize the deletion, and had me wipe the security server personally." "But you didn't delete everything." "I'm IT, Ms. Okafor. We don't delete anything. We back up to the cloud first, then delete the local copies. Standard protocol." Elena didn't know that, or maybe she just assumed I'd delete the backups too when she fired me. David's smile was thin and bitter. She shouldn't have assumed. He hit play. The video was crystal clear, high-definition security footage from multiple angles covering the executive kitchen where Lenora had made the smoothie that morning. Time stamp, 7:43 a.m. Lenora entered, looking exhausted and pregnant, moving with the careful slowness of someone dealing with morning sickness. She pulled ingredients from the refrigerator: spinach, banana, protein powder, the detox supplement Elena had specifically requested. Made the smoothie exactly as instructed, poured it into Elena's monogrammed tumbler, left it on the counter where Elena always picked up her breakfast. Then Lenora left. For 20 minutes, the kitchen was empty. Just the smoothie sitting there, bright green and innocent, waiting. Then Elena entered. She looked around carefully, checking to make sure she was alone. Pulled a small amber bottle from her purse. Unscrewed the cap with gloved hands. Poured a clear liquid into the smoothie. Stirred it with a disposable coffee stirrer that she then wrapped in a tissue and put back in her purse. Took a sip. Made a face. Took another sip, larger this time. Then she picked up her phone and dialed. The video had no audio, but Elena's performance was clear enough. Clutching her throat. Staggering. One hand on the counter for support. Calling for help with exaggerated distress. And just before people started running into the kitchen, just for a second, Elena looked directly at the camera with an expression that Patricia recognized from 1,000 courtroom liars. Satisfaction. "My God," Patricia whispered. "Keep watching." David fast-forwarded to later that same day. Elena in her office, alone, on her computer. Accessing the security system. Deleting the footage from the executive kitchen. Or trying to. She got the local server files, but she didn't know enough about IT systems to find the automatic cloud backup. Didn't realize that everything was being mirrored in real time to a server she didn't have access to. She'd covered her tracks perfectly, except for the one track she didn't know existed. She poisoned herself. Patricia sat back, mind racing through the implications. She deliberately ingested enough of whatever was in that bottle to make herself sick, blamed Lenora, and framed her for attempted murder. "Nightshade alkaloids," David said quietly. "I looked it up after I saw the news reports about what they found in her system. You can buy it online if you know where to look. Enough to make you violently ill, not enough to kill you if you get to a hospital fast enough. Perfect for framing someone. Why didn't you come forward sooner?" David's face darkened. "Because Elena called me the day before she fired me. Said she knew I had a daughter in private school, a wife who was a green card holder, a mortgage that was underwater. Said accidents happen to people who don't know when to keep their mouths shut. Said if I ever mentioned the security footage, I'd lose everything. He looked up, meeting Patricia's eyes. But then I heard about the Empire Project. Heard about the company falling apart. Realized Elena was destroying everything anyway, and my silence hadn't protected me at all. She fired me. Blacklisted me in the industry. My wife is terrified, my daughter had to switch to public school, and I can't get a job in IT anywhere in Manhattan because Elena Vance decided I knew too much. So you decided to burn her down. I decided to tell the truth. David pulled out the flash drive, set it on the desk next to the laptop. This is a certified copy of the cloud backup. Time-stamped, authenticated, unaltered. Everything you need to prove Lenora Gray is innocent. Everything you need to prove Elena Vance is a liar and a criminal and the one who should be in prison. Patricia picked up the flash drive like it was made of gold, which, legally speaking, it was. This was the evidence that would overturn Lenora's conviction. Get her out of prison. Give her back her freedom. Give her a chance to fight for her son. This was justice, 3 years too late but not too late to matter. Mr. Chen, Patricia said, already reaching for her phone to call the judge, you just saved an innocent woman's life. David nodded, something like relief crossing his face for the first time since he'd walked in. Then maybe Elena was wrong. Maybe I do know when to speak up after all. That afternoon, Patricia drove to Bedford Hills with the news that would change everything. Lenora Gray's nightmare was finally about to end. And Elena Vance's was just beginning. The gates of justice. The judge's voice was flat, administrative, like she was reading a grocery list instead of giving a woman back her life. In light of newly discovered evidence proving actual innocence and prosecutorial misconduct, the conviction of Lenora Gray is hereby vacated. Ms. Gray, you are free to go. Free. The word didn't feel real. Lenora stood in the same courtroom where she'd been destroyed 3 years ago, but this time the handcuffs came off instead of going on. This time Patricia Okafor stood beside her instead of a public defender who'd barely known her name. This time the cameras outside weren't waiting to capture her shame but her vindication. She didn't cry. Didn't collapse. Didn't show any emotion at all as the guards removed her restraints and Patricia guided her through the side exit where a car was waiting. She'd learned in prison that tears were currency you couldn't afford to spend, that showing emotion was showing weakness, that survival meant keeping everything locked down tight until you were alone. But she wasn't going to be alone. Not anymore. Not when CJ was out there, 3 years old, calling another woman mommy, growing up in the house that used to be Lenora's, living the life that should have been hers. Patricia had brought clothes, a tailored black suit that fit perfectly, designer heels, her natural hair styled in elegant twists. Lenora changed in the car, shedding the prison orange like a snake shedding dead skin, transforming back into the woman she used to be. Except not that woman. Someone harder. Someone who'd survived 3 years in hell and come out sharpened instead of broken. The custody hearing is scheduled for next week, Patricia said as they drove through Manhattan, buildings rising around them like Lenora had designed them to, strong, unbreakable, reaching for the sky. We're filing for emergency temporary custody based on fraud and your wrongful conviction. Michael's lawyers will fight it, but we have the evidence now. We have proof you were framed. We have proof Elena committed perjury. The judge will have to consider. Take me to the house. Lenora's voice was steady, cold, the voice of a woman who'd spent 3 years planning this moment. Lenora, I don't think that's wise. Michael has full legal custody right now. If you show up there without a court order. I said take me to the house. Patricia looked at her, seemed to recognize something in her eyes, and nodded. Changed directions. Drove toward the Upper East Side where Lenora's penthouse, Michael's penthouse now, rose 40 stories above the city she used to call home. They pulled up to the building where doormen used to greet Lenora by name, where she'd lived for 7 years, where she'd been happy once before happiness became something she couldn't quite remember. The doorman didn't recognize her at first, started to ask for ID, then his eyes went wide as he realized who she was. "Mrs. Gray, Ms., I didn't know you were. Is my husband home?" The words tasted like poison. Husband. Like Michael was still anything to her besides the man who'd stolen everything. "Mr. Gray is at the office. But Ms. Vance is upstairs with," he stopped, uncomfortable. "With my son." Lenora pushed past him toward the elevator, Patricia hurrying to keep up. "I know." The elevator ride to the penthouse felt eternal and too fast all at once. Lenora's heart was pounding, 3 years of prison-hardened composure cracking at the edges because somewhere above her was CJ. Her baby who wasn't a baby anymore, who'd learned to walk and talk and exist without her, who didn't know her face or her voice or that she'd spent every day in that cage planning how to get back to him. The elevator opened directly into the penthouse foyer. Lenora had designed it that way, wanted the first thing guests saw to be the floor-to-ceiling windows with Central Park stretching out beyond, and wanted them to feel like they were floating above the city. Now it just felt like walking into a stranger's home. Everything was different, white and sterile and expensive, all traces of warmth erased, all evidence of Lenora's existence removed like she'd never lived here at all. And then she heard it. A child's laugh. High and bright and achingly familiar even though she'd never heard it before, had only imagined what her son's joy might sound like during 3 years of silence. She followed the sound to what used to be her office, now converted into a playroom. And there he was. CJ. 3 years old. Dark curls like Michael's baby photos, skin the exact shade of Lenora's, playing with trucks on a carpet scattered with toys. And standing beside him, phone in hand, was Elena Vance. Elena looked up and saw her. The color drained from her face. You can't be here. You're supposed to be in prison for a crime you committed." Lenora's voice was ice. "For poisoning yourself and blaming me? For stealing my son? For destroying my life so you could play house in my home?" CJ looked up at the sound of raised voices, his little face confused, uncertain. He moved closer to Elena, grabbed her leg. "Mommy?" The word was a knife. Lenora felt it pierce clean through her chest, felt 3 years of carefully maintained control threaten to shatter. Her son. Her baby. Calling this woman mommy. "CJ," she whispered, dropping to her knees so she was at his level, trying to keep her voice steady even though everything inside her was screaming. "My name is Lenora. I'm." "Get away from him." Elena snatched CJ up, held him against her chest. "You have no right to be here." "Security." "I have every right." Patricia stepped forward, phone already recording. "Ms. Vance, you're aware your perjury has been exposed? That Ms. Gray's conviction has been vacated? That you're currently under investigation for fraud, attempted manslaughter, and conspiracy?" Elena's face went from pale to red. "This is my home. That's my son. You need to leave before I call the police." "You're home." Lenora stood slowly, everything she'd learned about cold fury in prison focused into this single moment. "I designed this penthouse. I chose every finish, every fixture, every piece of art you replaced with your soulless garbage. And that," she pointed at CJ, who was watching with wide, frightened eyes. "That is my son. The baby I gave birth to in chains while you plotted to steal him. The child you took from me 12 minutes after he was born. He doesn't know you." Elena was backing toward the door, CJ squirming in her arms. "He's mine. I've raised him. I'm the only mother he's ever known. Because you put his real mother in prison for a crime you committed." Lenora's voice finally broke, 3 years of grief cracking through. You poisoned yourself. You framed me. You took everything, my freedom, my career, my son, and you're going to pay for it. Elena ran. Actually ran, CJ crying in her arms, heading for the master bedroom like she could lock herself in and make this go away. But Patricia was already on the phone with the police, already explaining the situation, already requesting emergency protection for a child in the custody of a woman about to be arrested. Lenora stood in the ruins of her former home and listened to her son cry for a woman who'd stolen him, and felt something inside her finally, completely break. She'd imagined this moment 1,000 times. Imagine CJ running to her, recognizing her somehow, knowing in his bones that she was his mother. Imagine triumph and joy and immediate reunion. She'd never imagined this. Her son was terrified. Clinging to his kidnapper. Looking at Lenora like she was a stranger. A threat. We'll fix this, Patricia said quietly, hand on Lenora's shoulder. The court will order supervised visitation. We'll introduce you slowly, carefully. He'll learn who you are. This isn't over. But it fell over. It felt like even freedom couldn't undo what Michael and Elena had stolen. It felt like winning the war but losing everything that mattered anyway. The collapse. The lawsuit papers hit Michael's desk 3 days after Lenora walked out of prison, delivered by courier with clinical efficiency. Gray Architectural Innovations was being sued by a newly formed firm called Apex Design Group for intellectual property theft, fraud, and systematic appropriation of copyrighted architectural designs spanning 7 years. The lead attorney was Patricia Okafor. The principal plaintiff and CEO of Apex Design Group was Lenora Gray. Michael stared at the documents spread across his desk, at the exhibits showing side-by-side comparisons of Lenora's original blueprints and the buildings he'd claimed as his own designs. The Gray Tower. The Apex Center. The Manhattan Skybridge. Every flagship project that had made his reputation, every innovation that had made him famous, laid bare as stolen work. Her architectural signature was in every line, her mathematical genius in every calculation, her vision in every soaring structure that bore his name. She'd kept copies. Of course she had. Meticulous, brilliant Lenora who documented everything, who'd probably known even then that Michael was taking credit for her work but had loved him too much to call him out, had believed that supporting his success was the same as being valued. He'd built an empire on her stolen brilliance and convinced himself he deserved it. The fraud charges were worse. Mama V's testimony was attached as an exhibit, detailing the offshore accounts, the shell corporations, the systematic embezzlement Elena had orchestrated while Michael looked the other way or actively helped hide it. Millions of dollars moved through fake companies, investor money diverted to personal accounts, financial statements doctored to hide the theft. All of it traced, documented, proven. His phone was ringing constantly. Board members demanding emergency meetings. Investors threatening to pull funding. The Manhattan DA's office is calling about criminal charges. His lawyers telling him the evidence was overwhelming, the case was unwinnable, his best option was to settle and hope Lenora showed mercy. Mercy. From the woman he'd sent to prison pregnant. From the mother whose son he'd stolen. From the wife he betrayed, the woman who was currently upstairs packing suitcases with money that wasn't hers. Michael found Elena in the master bedroom, designer luggage open on the bed, jewelry and cash being thrown in with manic speed. She'd cut her hair short, dyed it dark, looked like a stranger trying to disappear. "What are you doing?" His voice sounded distant, hollow, like it was coming from someone else's body. "What does it look like?" "I'm leaving." Elena didn't even look at him, just kept packing. "Before the feds freeze the accounts. Before the arrest warrants come through. You should come with me. We can start over in Costa Rica. No extradition treaty. Start over." Michael laughed, and it sounded like breaking glass. "Elena, they have everything. The video of you poisoning yourself. The financial records. Lenora's original designs. It's over. It's over for you." Elena finally looked at him, and her eyes were cold, calculating, devoid of anything resembling love. "I have enough money to disappear. Enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life. You're the one whose name is on all the documents. You're the one who'll go to prison." The words hit like a physical blow. "I destroyed my marriage for you. Sent my wife to prison. Lost my son. Built everything around you. You built everything around yourself." Elena zipped the suitcase, grabbed her passport from the nightstand. "You wanted the glory without the work. Wanted to be called a genius without having the talent. I just helped you steal from someone who did. And it was working perfectly until you sent Lenora to prison while she was pregnant. That was stupid, Michael. That made her dangerous. You poisoned yourself. You framed her. And you testified against her. You took her baby. You chose me over her." Elena shouldered her bag, heading for the door. "Don't pretend you're the victim here. You knew what you were doing. You knew Lenora was innocent and you destroyed her anyway because keeping me happy was easier than facing what you'd become." Michael grabbed her arm, desperate, drowning. "Elena, please. I love you. We can fix this together." She looked at him with something like pity. "You never loved me, Michael. You loved what I represented. The mistress who made you feel young and powerful. The woman who told you what you wanted to hear. The partner in crime who helped you steal from your wife." She pulled her arm free. "And I never loved you. I loved the penthouse and the money and the power. I loved the life Lenora built that you were stupid enough to give me. But the throne is crumbling now, and I'm not going down with it." She walked out. Just like that. 7 years of affair, 3 years of playing house with his stolen son, countless promises of forever, and she walked out with stolen money and fake documents and not a single backward glance. Michael stood alone in the bedroom that used to be his and Lenora's, surrounded by Elena's abandoned things and the wreckage of choices he couldn't undo. His phone buzzed with another call from his lawyer. Another email about the Empire Project lawsuits. Another message from a board member demanding his resignation. He ignored them all and pulled out his phone, opened the camera roll to the photos he'd been too ashamed to look at for 3 years. Lenora at their wedding, radiant and hopeful. Lenora in her studio, sketching designs at 3 a.m. Lenora finding out she was pregnant, her face glowing with joy he'd destroyed 6 months later. The woman who'd actually loved him. Who'd actually built something real. Who he'd traded for a con artist with good hair and better lies. His phone rang again. Patricia Okafor this time. He answered. "Mr. Gray, I'm calling to inform you that Elena Vance was arrested 20 minutes ago at JFK attempting to board a flight to Costa Rica. She's being charged with fraud, embezzlement, perjury, and conspiracy. The DA is offering you immunity if you testify against her." Michael closed his eyes. Immunity. Like he deserved protection. Like he wasn't just as guilty. "And my son? CJ is in temporary foster care pending the custody hearing. Ms. Gray has been granted supervised visitation. The court will decide permanent placement next month. His son. In foster care. Because Michael had given him to a criminal to raise. Because Michael had destroyed the child's actual mother and replaced her with a fraud. Tell Lenora," his voice broke. "Tell her I'm sorry. Tell her. Mr. Gray, Ms. Gray doesn't want to hear from you. She wants you to stay away from her son. Sign over your parental rights. Disappear from their lives completely. The line went dead. Michael stood in the ruins of his empire, built on stolen designs and lies, and finally understood what Lenora had known all along. You can't build something real on a foundation of betrayal. Eventually, it all comes crashing down. The footnote. 6 months later, Michael Gray waited in the rain outside Lenora's new office building in Tribeca, a gleaming structure she'd designed herself from the ground up. Apex Design Group occupied the top 3 floors, her name etched in glass and steel across the entrance, visible from blocks away. Everything about it screamed success, permanence, the kind of architectural legacy he tried to steal and she'd reclaimed through sheer force of will. He'd been waiting for 2 hours, collar turned up against the October drizzle, hands shoved in the pockets of a jacket that had cost $3,000 when he'd bought it last year but now just looked worn. He'd lost weight he couldn't afford to lose, aged a decade in 6 months, moved from the penthouse to a studio apartment in Queens that smelled like mildew and broken dreams. Gray Architectural Innovations had declared bankruptcy 3 weeks ago. His reputation was destroyed. His money was gone, seized by courts and creditors and the dozens of lawsuits that seemed to multiply daily. He had nothing left except the desperate, pathetic hope that maybe, somehow, Lenora would let him see his son. The glass doors opened and she emerged, flanked by associates in expensive suits, her natural hair in elegant locks that fell past her shoulders, wearing power like armor. She looked extraordinary. Untouchable. Nothing like the pregnant woman he'd sent to prison, the broken mother he'd stolen from in a hospital room. She'd rebuilt herself into something magnificent, and Michael had been reduced to a man waiting in the rain for scraps of mercy. She saw him and stopped. Said something to her associates who glanced at Michael with barely concealed contempt before walking ahead to the waiting car. Lenora approached slowly, each step measured, her expression unreadable. Lenora. His voice cracked on her name. Please. I just need 5 minutes. You don't get 5 minutes. You don't get anything. Her voice was ice, each word precisely cutting. What are you doing here, Michael? I want to see CJ. I know I don't deserve it, I know what I did was unforgivable, but he's my son. I'm his father. I have rights. You signed away your rights 3 months ago. Remember? When your lawyer explained that giving up parental rights was the only way to avoid criminal charges for child endangerment. When you chose saving yourself over your son for the second time. Michael flinched like she'd struck him. I had to. They were going to prosecute me for giving custody to Elena when I knew she was dangerous. For letting a criminal raise my child. You mean for letting a criminal raise my child while his actual mother was in prison for crimes that criminal committed? Lenora stepped closer, and Michael could see the absolute absence of emotion in her eyes. No anger. No pain. Just nothing. You didn't choose to sign those papers because you were forced. You chose because that's what you do. You choose yourself. Every single time. I made mistakes. Terrible mistakes. But I'm trying to make amends. I've been in therapy. I'm getting help. I want to be better. I want to be a father to CJ. CJ doesn't need you. Lenora's words were final, absolute. He has a father figure now. A good man who reads to him every night and takes him to the park and doesn't have a history of destroying his mother's life. Someone who actually shows up. Someone who didn't put his mother in chains. Michael's chest tightened. Who? That's none of your business. CJ is none of your business. You're a stranger to him, Michael. You were barely present when you had custody, too busy with work and Elena and maintaining the lie that you were a genius instead of a thief. And now you're nothing. A footnote in our story. A cautionary tale I'll tell CJ someday about weak men who steal from strong women and lose everything. Lenora, please, he was crying now, rain and tears mixing on his face, all pretense of dignity abandoned. I know I destroyed us. I know I can never fix what I broke. But he's my son. I love him. I just want a chance to tell him I'm sorry, to be part of his life somehow, to make yourself feel better. Lenora cut him off, her voice sharp as a blade. That's what this is about, Michael. Your guilt. Your pain. Your need for redemption. It's always about you. Even now, standing here begging, you're thinking about what you need, not what CJ needs. That's not true. CJ needs stability. Safety. A mother who will never leave him again and a father figure who shows up every day. He doesn't need a man who'll disappoint him the way you disappointed me. Who'll choose himself the moment things get difficult. Who'll teach him that it's acceptable to destroy the people you claim to love. She turned to leave, and Michael grabbed her arm in desperation. Lenora, wait. Please. I'm begging you. She looked down at his hand on her arm, then up at his face, and Michael saw something flicker in her eyes. Not sympathy. Recognition. Like she was seeing him clearly for the first time, or maybe the last time, understanding exactly who he was and deciding he wasn't worth even her contempt. Let go of me. Her voice was quiet, dangerous. And don't ever touch me again. Michael released her like she'd burned him. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for everything. For the affair, for Elena, for the trial, for taking CJ, for not believing you, for destroying everything we built together. I'm sorry. I know you are. Lenora adjusted her coat, smoothed her locks, gathered her composure like armor. You're sorry you got caught. Sorry you lost everything. Sorry your empire collapsed. Sorry your mistress betrayed you. You're swimming in sorry, Michael. But you're not sorry enough to have done the right thing when it mattered. Not sorry enough to have trusted me over Elena. Not sorry enough to have stopped me from going to prison pregnant. Not sorry enough to have let me hold my son for more than 12 minutes. She stepped back, putting distance between them, physical and emotional. Your apologies mean nothing. They change nothing. They don't give me back 3 years. Don't undo the trauma CJ and I will carry forever. Don't rebuild the trust you demolished. I don't want your sorry. I don't want anything from you except your absence. What about forgiveness? What about mercy? What about the mercy you showed me when I was in labor in chains? What about the forgiveness you offered when I begged you not to take my baby? What about the compassion you had when my letters came back unopened? Lenora's voice rose, finally, some of that carefully controlled fury breaking through. You want mercy now that you're the one suffering. You want forgiveness now that you're the one who lost everything. You want me to save you the way I couldn't save myself from you. Michael had no answer. No defense. No words that could bridge the chasm between them. Go home, Michael. Live your small life in your studio apartment. Work your ordinary job. Build whatever ordinary future you can salvage. But stay away from me. Stay away from CJ. You're nothing to us. Not even worth my hatred anymore. Just empty space where a person used to be. She walked away, heels clicking on wet pavement, toward the car where her associates waited and the life she'd built from the ashes he'd made. Michael stood in the rain and watched her go, watched the taillights disappear into Manhattan traffic, watched the last possibility of redemption vanish with her. He stood there long after she was gone, rain soaking through his cheap jacket, people walking past like he was invisible, like he was already a ghost haunting the ruins of his own destroyed life. Somewhere across the city, CJ was having dinner with Lenora and the man who'd replaced Michael in every way that mattered. Somewhere, Lenora was living the life she deserved, the one she'd fought for, the one she'd built with her own hands after Michael had tried to bury her. And Michael was here. Alone. Forgotten. Exactly what he deserved to be. A footnote. Nothing more. Thank you for watching this story till the very end. If this story moved you, the next one will leave you completely stunned. It's even more intense, more twisted, and far more intriguing than you can imagine. Don't miss it. Click the image on your screen right now and dive straight into the next unforgettable story.